MacVoices is supported by LinkedIn Jobs. Find the right person for your business today with LinkedIn Jobs. Pay what you want and get $50 off your first job post at linkedin.com/MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Linode, your solution when you need a virtual server in the cloud. Use the code MacVoices to take $20 off your first purchase at linode.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, during all the issues we're seeing and all the shelter in place and everything, Apple decided to release some new hardware. And I've been anxious to talk to someone about it that has some thoughts and some wisdom behind those thoughts. And that's why Peter Cohen is here. Peter?
I don't know why you invited me, man. That's crazy. Wisdom?
Absolutely. You've been kicking around this scene for quite a while, so everything you do is well thought out.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, if I'd been, I think I would have done less time if I'd been convicted of second-degree murder at this point. But I definitely have some thoughts on the new Apple hardware that Apple released recently. Looks like interesting stuff.
Okay, so let's just sort of take it top to bottom before we actually get to the hardware itself. Let's talk about the timing of the release. This was pre what we would have expected to see at WWDC, which is not exactly unprecedented. But at the same time, with the restrictions that so much of the U.S., in fact, so much of the world have, it seemed a rather interesting time to decide to release new hardware. It certainly gave all of us something to smile about. That's the upside to it. But were you surprised at all to see, and especially not one, not two, but three things come out?
No, I wasn't surprised at all. I mean, a company like Apple is like it's like an aircraft carrier, right? It takes a long time to make course corrections and navigational adjustments. I'm certain that the production and distribution of this gear was planned out well in advance of any indication that coronavirus is going to impact Wuhan province as much as it did, let alone the rest of the world. So, this was Apple sticking to its guns and getting products out. Having said that, Apple is actually getting products into the channel at a very good time because demand for new laptops and mobile devices is off the charts right now. Because so many more people are working from home. In fact, there are shortages on mobile device equipment and laptops being reported at online retailers and so on, simply because demand is so high. So Apple is definitely hitting a seller's market right now, and even though they're limiting quantity, they're putting some restrictions on how many people can buy. Although, I mean, if you're buying more than 5 laptops, obviously you're using it like toilet paper. I don't know. You're probably, an IT department or buying on behalf of a company as opposed to, an individual purchase. But Apple's trying to make sure that it's got as much product as it can possibly get out to the channel. And I think that their timing for these products was good. And if you actually look at Apple's timeline for releasing new devices, both the MacBook Air and the iPad Pro certainly needed to be updated. The Mac Mini is kind of a throwaway. All they really did was, double the storage capacity on it. But these are important products for Apple and for Apple customers. So I'm glad that they're out, and I think that their timing for it is very good.
I like the idea that you pointed out that these are going to be sales to people that are working at home. Yes, we're hearing some stories about people being laid off, but I'm also hearing a lot of stories about companies finding ways to keep people working, and maybe even in some situations hiring people with that experience that don't have to be vetted through the normal come to the office and see how we like you channel, but are a little more focused on, can you get the job done? And we're willing to take a shot at you. And I really like that.
It's funny you should mention it, Chuck. Here in Massachusetts, so I watch the cable news, NECN, probably a lot more than is healthy right now, especially. But they ran a piece the other day about people working from home, and they concluded that people who are getting a taste of working from home for the first time may insist on more of it when they get back to the office. And I thought to myself after I watched the segment, I don't know a single person, and I've been an information worker who's been working from home since the late 90s, so I was way ahead of the curve on this, but I don't know a single person who works from home or who, given the option, doesn't want to work from home. The problem, in my experience anyway, with the conversations I've had with people, is that far more of them are not allowed the opportunity to work from home because either their bosses simply don't trust them to put in a full day's work, or there are active policies in place at their employer preventing them from doing it, or they simply, there's a void at the employer, and the employer simply doesn't have a work from home policy or a structured enough IT system to enable that to happen. So if this happens, if more people are going to be working from home, not just now, but after the pandemic is under control, my expectation is that it's a sea change that's going to have to happen on the corporate side, as opposed to, the will of people to work from home. Now, having said that, I understand that work from home is not ideal for everyone. Not everybody, has the awesome offices that you and I obviously do, to be able to work from. There's a great picture of Ira Glass from This American Life recording his episode for this week in his own closet. And it's just basically a wall of clothes in front of him, a wall of clothes behind him, and the mic. That's not an ideal circumstance for somebody who's used to an actual broadcast studio to be able to record their stuff. Having said that, and, kids running around, obviously, pets barking and getting in the way, or just the sort of the vagaries of working from home are not ideal for everybody. But if you're part of the information economy and it makes sense for you, obviously, come on in. The water's fine. There's a lot of benefits to it, not the least of which is the complete absence of pants, which is something that our friend Jeff Gamet, I'm sure, will readily attest to.
Okay, so neither one of us are going to stand up during this segment. No question.
I am standing, actually, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah, let's just leave it there. He's going to prove it. Oh, he's going to prove it. I see. Okay, yeah. Listen, I agree with you. I think that there are going to be some changes to everyone's work life, and I find it encouraging. I think the workers are going to ask for it. I think employers are going to find out that this is viable if they are given the right tools, and that I use that as this very smooth segue into our discussion of the hardware. So you mentioned the Mac Mini is probably the least of the upgrades here. So let's step back. It's double the capacity. Okay, that's fine. Who's the Mac Mini for, Peter, at this point? Who do you see the Mac Mini as being the ideal candidate for a Mac Mini?
Well, let's back up for a second, because the Mac Mini, when it was introduced very specifically to people who were coming from the PC. PC switchers were still a really big topic at Apple at the time. Apple was trying to was evangelizing its products for people who are sick and tired of Windows. Maybe they wanted a Mac, but they felt that the price of the Mac was too high. So the Mac Mini was there to give them an easy entry point. $499. You get the box, you use your existing keyboard, mouse, and screen. You can use your existing peripherals and printer and everything. And there, you've got a box that works, and it's running the latest version of the Mac operating system. Things have changed a lot in the decade and a half, I think, since the Mac Mini was first introduced. And Apple's iterated. But, it kind of crescendoed over the course of the past few years with the Mac Mini. But back in 2018, the company just came out with a 1-2 punch that made the Mac Mini really ideal for a lot of interesting vertical applications that I think maybe some people have sort of hacked Mac Minis into, but it wasn't really an ideal situation for. Pro music and Pro Audio. Mac Mini makes a great little durable workstation for musicians and audio engineers who may not want a laptop, may not want something as fragile as a laptop, but are looking for something headless that can just has gobs of bandwidth because it's got Thunderbolt 3. It's got upgradable memory for the first time in a few years on the Mac Mini, which is very nice. I've got a 2014 that I'm unfortunately stuck with memory-wise, although you can upgrade the storage, which is something that you can't do on the new Mac Mini, ironically enough. But that scientific engineering, I see them deployed for cloud storage, in server farms. People are using them as, for render farms and so on, even though they don't have very strong internal graphics processors. It's an integrated graphics processor that's built right onto the motherboard because it works with Thunderbolt 3 and because Apple's been very good about supporting eGPU external breakout boxes that use Thunderbolt 3. You can plug in a Mac Mini and get an eGPU box and have a very, very powerful rendering workstation for doing 3D graphics or doing special effects, using it for After Effects, let's say, in video environments and so on. So there are all these really cool little verticals that the Mac Mini just really neatly slides into now that it really wasn't ideal for before, but is much better suited for now. The difference is that, your average mom and pop consumer is going to look at that and go, wow, $800 for that tiny box. And I don't know. I can spend a couple hundred more and get a MacBook Air. Why should I bother? I still want one, but obviously I'm not your average user either. So my needs are probably a little bit more off the wall than regular folks, but it just fits into a lot of different verticals. So what Apple did this month is that they updated it. The specs on it are the same, but they refreshed it with twice the amount of storage. So the base $800 model gets, I believe, 256 gigs of SSD storage, and the higher priced model goes up to half a terabyte. That's great. If you need it, you can outfit your Mac Mini with more. You can, a configure to order through Apple's website and chonk it up to, I think, 2 terabytes now. Which is fine, but really, again, with Thunderbolt 3, you've got an unlimited amount of external storage that you can plug into. Go with an external SSD if you want to, and get blazing fast storage over Thunderbolt 3, or just a plain old hard drive or a RAID system of some type using spinning hard drives. Again, it is user upgradable on memory. So if you get it and you decide that you need to cap the RAM up a little bit higher than what it came with, you can do that. It's not a simple process, but it's doable even for the average user with the right tools, good lighting and the correct steps to follow. It's definitely achievable. So it's a very flexible little box.
LinkedIn Jobs is supporting this edition of MacVoices. Hiring the right people is one of the best ways to help grow your business, but it shouldn't take time away from your other priorities. With LinkedIn Jobs, it doesn't have to. Getting a job has changed. Finding good people for a job you need to fill has changed. And I don't know anyone who isn't looking for good people to make their organization run. With LinkedIn Jobs, you get candidates screened for both the hard and the soft skills you're looking for. That helps you make that hire fast. And I mentioned soft skills. LinkedIn looks beyond the work skills and qualification and puts your job post in front of the qualified candidates who match your requirements. Did you know that a person is hired every 8 seconds with LinkedIn Jobs? And that LinkedIn Jobs has been rated the #1 hiring platform for delivering quality hires? I use LinkedIn. I don't know anyone who is in business who doesn't use LinkedIn. And that's why, to find the right person for your business, you need to go to linkedin.com/MacVoices today. Pay what you want and get the first $50 off at linkedin.com/MacVoices. LinkedIn.com/MacVoices for $50 off your first hire. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks to LinkedIn Jobs for their support of MacVoices. I get torn on the Mini. I want one so bad, but I try to justify the use case for it because I would want to be maybe not maxing out the internal storage. As you said, with the SSDs now, that really is not as much of an issue as it used to be. So by the time I max out the memory and max out the chip, for not a lot more money, I can get an iMac, with this big, beautiful screen that's sitting in front of me, and roughly the equivalent ports, depending on which iMac model you're talking about. With the Mac Mini, with either one, I can expand those ports with a Thunderbolt dock. So, and I have to invest. If I get the Mini, I either better have a monitor or I have to go and buy one. And so that adds, by the time you do that, you can end up potentially spending a little bit more than the Mini and end up with a two-piece machine as opposed to this, the iMac that I have in front of me. So that's why it's a box that I want, but I just have a hard time justifying it because I really don't have anything I need to run headless right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if you look over my right shoulder, there's my 2014 Mac Mini still going strong after all this time. The Mac Mini is a niche product. It always has been. It's great if you've got existing accessories that you can recycle and use, and that's how I'm using it. I'm using it with an Apple Cinema display that I got, I think, with a Power Mac G4 way back in the day. None of the stuff that's running over there is particularly new, but it does get me, or it is a nice little box for what I need it to do. Which is, some media serving and some content creation tools that I don't want to tie up my daily driver with. So from that perspective, I think the Mac Mini fits a niche, but it is a niche product. But in the same token, I mean, the only real general purpose devices in Apple's Mac product line, I think, are the laptops and maybe the iMac. The iMac, the iMac Pro, for example, obviously a very niche product. The Mac Pro, a very niche product. The Mac Mini, a niche product as well. It's the laptops that have, I think, the most general appeal, and that is why the laptops outstrip the other models by far when it comes to actual sales. People are much more drawn to the laptops and see a better value there than they do out of a lot of the desktop hardware that Apple sells. Good thing, though, that Apple makes products to suit many different needs because we all have different expectations from what we're going to be using. Yeah.
And it's interesting to see the overlap, I think, between them because you both monetarily, but also just in function that, I can get this, but if I just did a little more, I could do that, but I don't really need to do that, or I want to do this, and so that eliminate. It's a very nice problem to have, let's say.
You were talking about the iMac for a moment ago, and my reason for preferring the Mac Mini over the iMac is exactly as you can see over my right shoulder. The screen is separate from the box. The iMac is a very difficult machine to get inside of if you need to repair it or if you need to service it for any reason. And that's one of the cool things about the Mac Mini. Like let's say that you're a musician or an audio engineer. You're doing sound work for a gigging band. Let's say once we're all allowed to leave our houses again, or you're doing an audio project that requires you to actually go out. The bottom line is a laptop is just a delicate piece of equipment, and it's also a very stealable piece of equipment. Somebody sees that and they're like, okay, great, going to take off with it. Mac Mini, you can hide a little bit more. You can make headless, as you were saying, which means working without a display, jack into it remotely from the laptop that you've got in your bag, let's say. Plus it's got a lot of storage. So like I said, there are these interesting little niche markets where it makes sense for it, but it's not the machine for everyone, that's for sure.
You make a great point, because it is a very powerful portable machine that is not a laptop. And if you want to plug it into a huge 4K 5K display, you can do it. If you want to plug it into some tiny little 1080p thing that somebody had 15 years ago, yeah, you can probably do that. So yeah, there's no question about its versatility.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that, Chuck, actually, because you can't see it in frame right now, but I actually have the Mac Mini hooked up to a flat panel display. So when Apple does its keynote presentations, this is usually actually what I'm streaming it from.
Okay.
Simply because I don't have an Apple TV in my office. I've never really had the need for one. But anyway, so there you go. So yeah, I mean, again, versatility is key.
Absolutely. So okay. So we beat the Mac Mini to death, but I think I really think it needs to be talked about a little bit, because it is a nice little machine. Which one do you consider the next up? Would it be the iPad Pro or the MacBook Air?
Let's talk about the iPad Pro, because that I think is a really interesting device.
Today's MacVoices is supported by Linode. You can build it on Linode. What can you build on Linode? Pretty much anything you want, from a server perspective. With fast native SSD storage, industry-leading processors, a 40 gigabit network, your server is going to be really fast. So your resulting web presence is going to be really fast. With Linode's quick install options, you can get all kinds of servers up and running with just a click or two. WordPress, Minecraft, OpenVPN, Arc, WireGuard, Drupal, and more are all at your command. So creating is easy. Even if you have dozens of Linodes installed, their easy-to-use dashboard makes managing easy. So management is easy. Linode has data centers all over the world. From Newark to London, Singapore to Toronto, Linode has you covered. So managing geography-related matters is easy. In those rare instances that a problem does arise, Linode has 24/7 live customer support. So support is easy. You can configure backups when you need them, with 3 times data replication, so keeping the data on your servers safe is easy. Increasing storage and decreasing storage can be done with a click, so adjusting to your growing or shrinking needs is easy. In other words, using Linode for virtual cloud servers is easy. That's why you need to visit linode.com/MacVoices right now to find out what it can do for you. That's linode.com, linode.com/MacVoices. If you've been waiting to check out a virtual server, now is your big chance. Thanks to Linode for their support of MacVoices.
Some of us have been sort of waiting for this. I know I don't mind saying that I have skipped an iteration or two of the iPad Pro upgrades, because there was, as much as I wanted them, there was nothing compelling enough there that said I needed that, or it's really going to improve my productivity or my experience. This one it's got me looking hard and thinking that maybe I should be doing an upgrade about this time.
Yeah, the timing was right for it. We were expecting an iPad Pro to be announced at some point this spring, because it's been about a year and a half since the iPad Pro was refreshed. We got a new iPad Air last year. We got a new iPad last year, but we even got a new iPad Mini last year. But the Pros were left out, so we were expecting to see a new Pro this year, and Apple didn't disappoint. Oh, maybe I shouldn't say it that way. Yeah, Apple delivered an iPad Pro. I think that some folks were expecting it to be a little bit more of a spec bump than it actually was. But I don't get too caught up in spec. Apple designs for the spec that it needs based on thermal requirements, based on battery use, based on a whole host of other stuff. So inside it's got the A12Z Bionic chip, or A12Z, I guess, depending on where in the world you are, with the embedded M12 processor. It's got a nice amount of horsepower, but it really wasn't the catapulting bump that I think a lot of folks were talking about. And that's why there's been a few pundits who have been wagging about how this might be the new iPad 3, that Apple might actually have another iPad Pro refresh in store for us later this year. And some of the analysts who have connections in Apple supply chain overseas are suggesting that might be the case. I cannot judge the veracity of any of that. And when people have asked me, hey, should I buy, a new iPad Pro or a new Mac now or wait? My answer is always buy it when you need it, and just assume that before you expect it, it's going to be obsoleted by something else. That way you won't ever get burned by buyer's remorse, because, look, I'm an iPad 3 owner. So, fool me once, shame on you, Apple. The big difference with the iPad Pro, of course, is the LiDAR stuff, which means that cops are going to be pulling you over with iPad Pro. No, it does not mean that at all.
I hadn't even thought about that.
The LiDAR stuff is really cool. It kind of gives you an insight where Apple is aiming this. Apple is saying, hey, we think that AR, augmented reality, is very important. We're building technology now into these devices to take better advantage of it. And LiDAR actually has a lot of practical applications in many of the business verticals where the iPad Pro fits in nicely. For example, an interior decorator with the right software could walk into somebody's house, map out a room or, an area using the LiDAR, and then say, hey, that beautiful sconce is going to look great over the fireplace. This is how it'll look. Or, oh, you're interested in that furniture? Well, let's take a look in augmented reality to give you a sense of how it's going to look. Real estate agents, I can see using this stuff. All sorts of little verticals where people are already using iPads. I think that'll come in handy. Like, for example, we just had our floors done in my house about 2 or 3 months ago, and the guy who came in to do the measurements for the company that we used came in with an iPad, and he beamed all of his stuff using a laser and had it all plugged in, and had a very convincing looking floor plan. And like an architecture style floor plan ready for me before he even left. That was pretty impressive. And that's using, probably a 3 or 4 year old iPad at the time. So Apple understands how these things are getting used in the field, and they're really interested in making it easier for business professionals and others to get the most out of them. In that respect, I think that the iPad Pro is definitely a step in the right direction, a good iterative step. I don't know if it's going to be replaced. Of course, you also got much better camera work in the iPad Pro as well, and we cannot underemphasize how important cameras are to users. All I'm saying, though, please, people, listen to me. I beg of you, do not bring your iPad Pro to a show. That is the rudest damn thing in the universe. I see it happen every so often. Outdoor festivals, indoor shows, whatever, don't haul out your iPad or your iPad Pro. It's a lot of hardware to have bouncing in front of your face and in front of mine at, a concert. That's just no bueno.
Listen, I agree with you completely. Funny thing is, I'm the one that's going to advocate for video projects using the iPad Pro, but I'm with you. Definitely not at a concert. Definitely not where you're potentially infringing on someone else's space or their view. That said, I get kind of excited about the new camera layout in the new iPad Pro because of all the functions we're seeing come out with all the power in those chips. And now we're seeing at least one utility out there that can record from but at least 2 cameras at once. I mean, there's so many things here from a filmmaking or a video production standpoint, and not, again, as you said, Peter, not the casual thing of going to a concert or going to a kid's baseball game or something. But yeah, I've said it here before. If you an iPad Pro versus an iPhone of any kind as the video device, you've got a much bigger battery, you've got a much bigger viewfinder, and therefore probably a little bit easier to do the fine-grained controls. A lot of advantages to it, a lot of disadvantages, not the least of which is the money involved, the fact that it can be knocked off a tripod a bit easier than an iPhone can. So again, it's the right tool for the right job. But yeah, this one has got me really thinking hard about doing an upgrade. Yeah.
I mean, DoubleTake is the app, right, from FiLMiC Pro. DoubleTake, they use the API that Apple exposed to be able to do multiple video recording streams. That's really cool because it means that somebody in the field can use an iPad Pro to, for example, do a two-way interview like what you and I are doing, Normally you might set up a camera for the interview subject, and then a second camera. You'd have to have a second camera for your reaction shots for the interviewer. Now you can do that all, in one device. That's a game changer. And, Chuck, I don't know about you, but as I'm watching the news, I told you before a little while ago, I'm kind of a news junkie and I watch it religiously, almost every day. I'm noticing that as more people are trying to, obey restrictions on movement or social distancing or whatever, you're seeing a lot more news people recording from home, and they're recording on their iPhones. They're recording on their iPads. So this is the way that we're already using these devices, and it's just exciting to see. Now, the camera aside and LiDAR aside, the other big thing that Apple did with this is simultaneously introduce iOS 13.4 with support for trackpads. Finally, this isn't the first time you've been able to use a trackpad with an iPad. But up until now, it's been a feature that's really kind of been hidden in the accessibility functionality of the iPad, and it has been extremely limited, especially compared to the iPad's biggest competition, which is Microsoft's Surface tablet, which just effortlessly and very elegantly incorporates input from devices like mice and trackpads. 13.4 limits it to the iPad Pro series. You can use it on the new ones and also last year's models, which is great. But this is a real game changer for a lot of people. Apple's got its $350 keyboard, which is very dear. That is a lot of money to spend. I mean, because when you get even like an 11-inch iPad, I think that's $200 for the trackpad equipped keyboard for that thing. You're still talking about basically MacBook Air area price, and it's still a device running iPad OS as opposed to Mac OS, which I don't know about you, Chuck. For me, I would rather have a Mac. If I'm going to spend $1,000, I would rather have a Mac than a tablet with a keyboard and a trackpad. All that aside, that's a big game changer. I'm glad to Apple embrace this. I want to see them do more of it in the rest of the line as they continue to upgrade. I think that's exactly it. I think by the way, I think that we're seeing this debut in the iPad Pro right now, but we saw the Pencil debut in the iPad Pro, and now you can use the Pencil on just about every iPad as well. So I have a feeling that as time goes on and as Apple refreshes these lines, we're going to see trackpad support become ubiquitous on the iPad, and that's very exciting. It's very exciting to me, the idea of getting an iPad Mini, a future generation iPad Mini, with a new Magic Keyboard, and to be able to work from anywhere and just slip my computer, in a jacket pocket, for example, or whatever. That's the dream. I got an iPad back in 2010, fully expecting that by the end of the year, this is how I'm going to be using my device. And of course, that never happened. It was just a kludge at the time. But this is exciting to see Apple get to this step. And, of course, Microsoft is like, yeah, what have you guys been waiting for? But I'm glad to see it finally happen.
We'll have more with Peter Cohen on not only working with the iPad as a productivity device, but also his thoughts on the new MacBook Air in the next section of our interview with Mr. Peter Cohen. Until the next time, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. Thanks for watching.
Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.